Today we're going to be doing some Dan McKellen. All right, so I'm responding both to him and the person he's responding to because I think both takes are wrong. Let's get to it.
Let's take a look at a video.
The demonization of paganism and witches is the demonization of women. Paganism is a female-oriented...
No, that's completely false. As somebody who studies ancient paganism and ancient occultism, I do mean the word study. Like, as in, I dedicated a large chunk of my early life to studying it. Most of it is actually patriarchal control of women, is what most of what paganism was. It's feminism, where they've recontextualized it, highlighting Lilith and Satan, or Lucifer, as figures to be looked up to as rebels against the patriarchy here being represented by God, not vice versa. So normal typology, patriarchy is representing God. In this reversal, God is representing the patriarchy. So therefore, those who rebel against the patriarchy, Satan and Lilith, are heroes. In actuality, ancient paganism was super patriarchal. There are very few religions worldwide where the women are dominant. There are so few that when you go and you read studies about it, the cultures that do have a dominant matriarchal society are highlighted as unusual and unique and interesting, being different. But no, most pagan religion was actually dedicated to the control of women. You think of the gods and goddesses, most of the goddesses actually hated women, and most of the goddesses would punish women for being promiscuous, not being dedicated to their shrine, that kind of stuff. So while what you're saying is very nice and very entertaining, it's just not true. And if you want sources, can I recommend Ancient Greece, Politics, Society, and... Hold on. Give me a second. Let me get a few of my sources. Aside from just reading ancient literature, which I recommend everyone do. I recommend this book. I've recommended it many times before. May I recommend this book, Spartan Women? It's very good. By Sarah B. Palmy. I love that chick. She's a great historian, great writer. And by the way, when I say great historian, I don't mean that scholars think she's a great historian. I have no idea what scholars think. I'm saying I enjoy her writing and I find it very correct. Can I recommend, right here, Ancient History of the World? And then I'm going to give you a kind of hodgepodge, if you will. You can read Herodotus. You can read Thucydides. You can read Xenophon. You can read... I don't think some other ones that I would recommend here. Darius, I should say Diodorus, both good. Polybius, Livy is really good also on understanding this. They have Cicero here. I don't recommend Cicero for that. They're recommending Seneca the Younger, Jophetius, Plutarch. Plutarch is great for understanding this. Tacitus is a little bit late. Arrian's really good. Appian's really good. Lucian is fun. Cassius Dio, amazing. But yeah, that's what I would recommend for you to learn a little bit about actual ancient paganism. You could also just read Theogony, Working Days, read some cultural stuff on ancient Greece. I think Dictionary of Civilizations, ancient Greece, would be a good one for you. Yeah, but she has no understanding of how ancient religions worked. They were usually patriarchal religions meant to control women and organize society. They're also very propagandistic and used to support the city-state or to solidify the power, or verify even the power, of the king or emperor, especially Babylonian, Mesopotamian societies. So Jesus' idea that we're not going to endorse any single king, and instead the only true king is Jesus, very revolutionary. Then, of course, immediately as soon as we have the Pope's papal office established and we have endorsement from an emperor, we start endorsing kings and presidents. Well, that's now we get into politics. Let's keep going. She has no understanding.
Spirituality, religion, practice. Okay.
So the word paganism does not index a religion, a spirituality, or a practice. It is a broad and unbounded designation.
There's a really interesting, and I can't find it anymore. It was tied to a webpage that I used to do a lot of study and research on. But, well, the main webpage is still there, although I think it's slightly abandoned. I don't think I've updated it in a long time. I think it's called Theora. It would link to a resource page that's kind of disappeared. But they had this great distinction between urban and rural and rustic gods, and how pagan and heathen mean slightly different things, at least in ancient context and in anthropology, anthropology context.
Of non-Christian and non-Jewish religions, spiritualities, and practices. And while certainly there are some among that unbounded category that are matriarchal and that are more women-centric, this is not remotely an accurate characterization of all paganism, which is not...
It is not remotely accurate of most goddesses. Most goddesses were very harsh on their female practitioners. Remember, in ancient Grecian society, women were not allowed to leave the house. They had to stay inside the house. They had actually not even allowed to mix with the men. So there would be like a men's area. There would be a family area, a men's area, and then this like back area where the women lived, and that was mostly next to like the laundry and the cooking and all that kind of stuff happened. So yeah, women were very subjugated in ancient Greece and in other ancient polytheistic and paganistic societies. Don't let the modern hype fool you. It ain't true. Gay people were also very repressed in these ancient societies too. So again, don't let the modern hype fool you. Just because it's not Christian doesn't mean that Christian ideas didn't develop out of those cultures.
Remotely monolithic.
It is female centric. Okay, and
Nope.
that is why the church demonized it.
So traditions that we label pagan were being demonized within Greco-Roman period Judaism long before Christianity, much less.
Mark Reed says, doesn't depend on the city-state? Not really. There is a time, and here I'm, in my mind, I'm thinking about the 5 sacred wars from 595 BC all the way up to 280 BC. The prophetess, the main prophetess. And this influenced a lot of my early writing and my fiction writing. So they actually went through these holy wars fighting over who controlled the Delphic Order. And they're actually fighting over control because who controls her can dictate how people live their lives. So in multiple different religions, different pagan cults follow the Delphic Oracle. So, yeah, Oracle of Delphi. So because of that, it was like controlling the Pope. And so you could dictate how your society would run and all of that. So we think of the Pantheon, but you got to understand the Pantheon is a later development in ancient Grecian cultures. Even in other ancient polytheistic religions, there's usually only one, you're dedicated to one goddess or one god. And you can pray to other ones for specific situations, but if you betray your god or goddess, you were burnt alive, you were put in a jar and suffocated. Like, you had a lot of like really brutal punishments for praying to the wrong goddess. And it's not that you can't pray to multiple gods, it's not that you have to pick one, but once you pick one, you're under the rule of that religion. And if your city-state is dedicated to a patron, they take it super seriously that you pay dedication to that god or goddess. Otherwise, things will go very wrong for them. And even in ancient Greece, they viewed the history of who was the patron god or goddess as kind of documenting who conquered. So if someone came in with a different god or goddess and they conquered your city, well, now that city is going to pray to the winning god or goddess. So this lady has a complete misunderstanding of how that developed, how patriarchal it was. And like I said, yeah, you can find some exemptions, but those exemptions are very rare. Venus or Aphrodite was a male-dominated religion. The Maenads had a special ceremony where the guy would have violent sex with a female, and then right when he was about to climax, they would cut off his stuff. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that is not feminist at all, but we've re-feminized a lot of this stuff in modern culture as a rebellion against Christianity. And if you actually go back and look at the actual religion as it was actually practiced in ancient times, it's very patriarchal. Women have been subjugated for a very long time, long before Christianity or Judaism ever came along.
Less any church associated with Christianity existed. And while being female-centric may have been the reason for some early Christian leaders' demonizations of certain pagan traditions, I'm unaware of any lists where it's at or near the top. So it's certainly not the reason that it was demonized by the church.
Spartan women were not as free as people think that they were. My specialty in my ancient studies was the city of Sparta. When I say specialty, I mean my obsession. My obsession was ancient Sparta, so that's what I read the most of. But yeah, no, again, don't let the hype fool you. Women were not free in ancient cultures. Even in the highest cultures where women could excel all the way up to pharaoh or empress or queen, the rest of the women were highly, highly subjugated. So just because you can find one exception doesn't mean that in that culture women were free. That's the whole point of the myth of the Amazons. I'm not talking about the inspiration of the myth. I'm not talking about the Scythian warrior woman. I mean the actual myth of the Amazons. The whole point is to have a counterculture to highlight and satirize what would happen if women were in charge, and so that way men could laugh at it and say, see, this is why we can't have women in charge. Look what happened to the Amazons. That is the whole point of those myths. They're a lesson that women are not capable. So this is very ugly stuff. If you don't understand that context and you think of this mythology as being real, you're kind of forgetting. Well, yeah, but the Helots are the slaves. If you're a high-class male in Sparta and you're a warrior, you have a lot more. Freedom might be the wrong word. I mean, you have to almost kind of use woke language now, but take out the wokeness. You have a lot of power and privilege by being higher up in rank, by being a general or being a senator.
One, he's the son of a pagan. You can do the deep dive on that, because the Virgin Mary, really, Mary was a priestess. She was a part of a priestess.
That's not true at all. That's not documented anywhere. There are some theories about that. There's speculation about that. None of that is true or real. There's some satire against Christians in the Roman period, right before Rome turned into a Christian nation, that make these kind of claims, especially when you're talking about Sol Invictus, Pantera, and other anti-Christian claims. She's getting it from documentaries and movies like Zeitgeist, a few other stuff. It's one of the reasons why I was so against myth vision for a very long time, because I saw it as a source of this really terrible misinformation. And maybe before Kip Davis and the other scholars got involved with myth vision, maybe it was, I don't know. But that's why I refused to watch myth vision for so many years, is because I felt like it was a source for a lot of this misinformation. But if you listen to more occultish people like Dat Darling, you go back a few years and you read some of these, the Witch's Bible or any of, it's over there. I can't reach it. I don't want to get out of the chair. But you can read a lot of these psychedelic-induced books, and they make these claims. And like I said, they're getting it from satires and critiques on Christianity that go back to a later Roman period. No. This has nothing. So Mark Reed is saying, yeah, well, Jesus was accused of practicing sorcery at the Sanhedrin, but was he? No, this has nothing to do with the Jewish accusations. So for the sake of this argument, the Bible doesn't even have to be a Jewish book. It can be a Greek book. You don't even have to believe the Bible is a Jewish book to understand where these misconceptions are coming from. In the Greek societies that these books were written, the Romans, who were pushing against Greek influence and pushing against Jewish influence — I know it sounds weird that they're pushing against Greek influence because they love Greece so much and they adopt so much from it. Watch Rome season 1. Season 2 is not as historically accurate, but watch Rome season 1 and watch some of the behind the scenes stuff. And they explain this really well, where, yes, they want to steal all the good stuff from the culture, but they also want to subjugate that culture to be subservient to them, to show that they are the ones in charge. And so it starts off with them trying to get rid of what we would call barbarian ideas. And then it starts becoming, well, let's get rid of Greek ideas. And then it becomes, well, let's get rid of not Greek ideas because they're good. Let's get rid of Greek culture. And then it becomes, well, okay, let's just get rid of Jewish ideas. And then it becomes, well, let's get rid of Christian ideas. And then you get Nero, and then you get Domitian. So there's a lot of context there that's missing when a lot of these apologists do this kind of thing. That's why I wanted to do this video, is because I disagree with Dan and I disagree with her. But it's because I've heard apologists twist these stories so often. And I've seen psychedelics and witches and Wiccans twist these stories so often. When you actually go back to the sources, it's pretty clear what's happening in the political sphere when it comes to Christianity and all this stuff. But we'll get into that when Dan does his take on the Virgin Mary.
Priesthood, that if you were right, your consent has to be given for you to lose your virginity. And if that was taken from you, you are still considered a virgin.
Now, here's what I don't understand. So she's talking about paganistic societies' rules. But in the larger culture, women have no rights of their own. They are the property of men. So when you did something against a woman, you weren't technically violating her rights. You're violating the rights of the father. You're violating the rights of the future husband. That's why dedicating a woman or daughter to a sect, to like Aphrodite or Isis, was a way to circumvent that system, and also a way to get rid of trouble. Like women who were troubled. This is actually like the Witcher series. They got this part right. You take a woman who's a problem, whether she's not from a good birth, from an affair, mentally disabled, physically disformed, and to get rid of her because you didn't do the right thing by letting them die at birth, you would simply send them to a cult. And by cult here, I don't mean like modern cult. You'd send them to these religious sects and you'd get rid of your problem. You know, oh, she's promiscuous, send her to Aphrodite. Oh, she's, this, send her to that. And you get rid of your problem, and you have what's called the weird women. And the weird women are great. They show up in later literature as the weird sisters and stuff like that. But that's why they're, the weird women, the weirdling women, these strange witches, as you would think. But ancient culture is against witchcraft. There are witch hunts before there's ever Christianity, before there's ever Judaism. So it's a way to subjugate and get rid of the weird women. So don't think that Christianity is the one who introduced these concepts. Paganism was doing its own persecution against witches a very long time ago. Yeah, it's exactly, Mark, you're 100%, you're a fire on all cylinders. That's exactly what was going on. Exactly what people would do in later centuries by sending them to a nunnery. This is what they were doing in ancient times. Get rid of the problem child and send them somewhere. Dedicate them to a god or goddess, and they're not your problem anymore. And they didn't just do this with women, they did this with men too. But a firstborn male, this is why Judaism's so revolutionary, because they want the secondborn or the thirdborn. They're not taking the firstborn is supposed to be dedicated, but you're actually sacrificing a sheep so you can get out of that system. But in most ancient cultures, it's your firstborn son that's dedicated to the god or goddess. And then it's your lastborn. And everyone in between, whatever. And so your firstborn is the one with the status. So that's the one you want dedicated to the god or goddess, because that's the one you want to be king. That's the one you want to be head of the family. If you have any family gods or tribal gods, that's who you're going to dedicate. So that way he can be in the running to be a leader. That's what you want. You want, especially in ancient societies where it's more familiar, where it's more family based, you want your leader to be your oldest, to be your eldest.
You go through a cleansing ritual and you are still considered a virgin. That is why Jesus was born to a perceived virgin. Okay?
So no deep dive necessary or even really possible here, because this is all entirely made up and there are no data from antiquity that support any of these claims. To begin, the virgin birth is not historical. It did not happen.
Now, his not historical is really ironic, because his next sentence says it is historical. I'm going to first explain what he means after he says it, and then I'll explain my take on it, and then I'll explain what the Christians did to counter that take. Not my take, but like the general take. Because there is a counter argument to the virgin birth, and it has to do with Pantera.
It is a secondary Christian innovation that took place toward the end of the 1st century CE, as Christians were grappling with Jesus' origins and wanted to show that they were completely divine and were not tainted by the sin of sexual desire and sexual activity. And so it's also happening under the influence of Greek philosophical morals.
Wait. It sounds like what he's saying is very strong, but wait, it's very weak. Wait. Be patient. Don't freak out, for you Christians that are watching, and everyone else that's just having fun. Just wait. Be patient. He gets to it.
But we don't see it in our earliest Christian literature.
We don't see it in our earliest Christian literature. Asterisks?
It's nowhere mentioned in the writings of Paul or in the Gospel of Mark. It first pops up in the Gospel of Matthew
But it first pops up in the Gospel of Matthew. So let me explain for those playing at home. Most people who read the kind of books that I read and that have studied the kind of stuff that Dan has studied, not that I'm putting myself on the same level as Dan, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying those of us who are exposed to these ideas understand that the Bible was written far after the oral tradition, which is far after the events, if they happened. Okay? Most of us who read this kind of stuff believe the events happened. They might not have happened the way that they're reflected in the Bible because of this development and time and space. Narrative drift, if you will. Okay, so what Dan is saying is that our earliest sources on record, which would be the letters of Paul, don't have a theology that's developed later in the Gospels, even though narratively the Gospels come first. Chronologically, the letters are written first. And while there is at least one or two letters that do hint at later Christian dogma, theology, we, meaning scholars, think they're pseudepigrapha, or at least inauthentic. So, even though this is the earliest parts of the Bible, we're saying they're not authentic and they're not real. And the gospel that most church fathers would have said is the earliest, or that most Christians like to put first, which is Matthew, is now a later document. Later meaning 60 years, 70 years after the death of Christ, not meaning 1,000 years later. Don't be a conspiracy person. Within the realm of pre-Nicene Christianity, anti-Nicene Christianity, but not within the realm of Jesus' followers are the ones who actually physically wrote it. Okay, that's meaning his apostles are not the ones who physically wrote it. Maybe their descendants, disciples, their communities that they founded, whatever. Okay, that's what Dan is saying. But he's making it sound like it's a huge gap. It's not a huge gap. 30 years, 40 years, max 60 years. And 60 years is really pushing it. Let's say Jesus died at 33. You're talking about 30 years later, 60 at the earliest, 70, 75 at the latest. You can't really push it too far beyond the destruction of the temple. Even if you want to say that all the prophecies are predicting something that already happened, you can't push it up into, you can't start getting into the early church fathers, because the earliest church fathers are confirming stuff that's in the Gospels. The Gospels have to be at least in existence when the early church fathers are referencing them, so that the early church fathers are a really good barrier to pushing the dates too far into modernity. Let's call it that. beside the point. So that's Dan's little thing. My take on this. The earliest Gospels, the writings are definitely 100% confirming Trinitarian ideas and virginal birth ideas, divine ideas. Now, there's nothing wrong with Dan's assumption, and it is an assumption. Remember, all theories about what happens pre-Bible being written, post, I don't know, Caesar dying, that is Augustus Caesar, Octavian, to Bible, put it that way, is all speculation about what's going on in Judaism at that time. We don't know. We don't have a lot of documents there. We don't have a lot of writing. We don't have a lot of writing for a lot of the cultures that are around there. So there's a lot of assumptions happening here. But based on the data that's available, you don't have evidence of how things developed. So you can use criticism, you can use theology, you use different ways to try to fill in the gap of how things developed. I don't think it's incorrect to say that the dogmas pre-existed the Bible. I don't think that's an incorrect statement. So John reflecting Trinitarian ideas mean that Trinitarian ideas existed before John wrote them down. That's fine. Matthew writing about a virginal birth and a divine Jesus means that the ideas of a virginal birth and divine Jesus existed before he wrote them down. Again, that's fine. But as a Christian, to me, that's signs that's what the story actually was. Because we don't have any evidence of the development. We have Paul's letters that seem to confirm or at least nudge in the direction of the Gospels, and in the Gospels stating what they state. So as a Christian, it's fine. It's fine both. And John Burden, who I'm 2 hours away from finishing, says as much. There's no conflict until you get to the declarative statements that some modern scholars try to make. And by modern scholars, I mean both the apologists, the theologians, and the historical biblical critics. When you start trying to make declarative statements about what was actually in this period that we know nothing about, you're just bullshitting. And yeah, you can be convinced of your bullshit. That's fine. But we're arguing over phantasms. We don't know. We're arguing over shadows. And Paul, in one of the letters that could be pseudepigraphal, who knows, says, don't argue over numbers. Don't argue over ages. Don't argue over these insignificant facts. Either you believe Jesus really rose from the dead and therefore he's God, or you don't. That's it. That's take it there. You're good. If you do, here's a whole bunch of other stuff you're going to get. A lot of theology, a lot of creedal stuff, a lot of development. Here you go. If you don't believe, it's a false start. You know what I mean? If you don't believe, it's a non-starter.
With the help of a specific interpretation of the Septuagint's translation of Isaiah 7:14. So,
and that's the virgin. That's tying it way too much to that one reading, considering there are multiple readings of the Septuagint, even in ancient times. But let's not worry about that.
Once again, this is all made up.
The blood of Christ? You're telling me that the priest told you to drink the blood of Christ and eat his body and you didn't?
Again, the blood is wine. The wine is blood. Transubstantiation, not actually drinking physical blood, but metaphysical blood. The substance, not the accident, has changed. You're making a mistake that Pliny the Younger made. He's like, I don't know what to do with these guys. Or he writes to the emperor, he's like, I don't know what to do with these Christians. They're drinking blood. It's like, no, he's misunderstanding that it's the Eucharistic meal. So congratulations, you're making an error that a lot of ancient Romans made. You're showing yourself to be uneducated.
That's a blood ritual.
So this all depends on how one understands a blood ritual and where they reify the boundaries of that concept. There are certainly ways that communion is conceptualized that could fall within those boundaries, but it would be toward the periphery, and again, would depend entirely upon how.
And then it would be unorthodox. And orthodoxy is the version of Christianity that won out. And for those of us who are in orthodoxy and tradition, we believe it's the actual original correct form of Christianity.
How one understands it.
Okay, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, yeah, that was appropriated from maiden, mother, crone.
So here's an interesting little factoid of me. I was kind of obsessed with Hecate back in the day. I thought she was hot. I'm going to be very blunt. I was a weird goth kid. I thought she was hot. Mother, crone, and I actually have I don't have a triple goddess statue. And I don't think this will get me in trouble with YouTube. So I have L3 tier herself done. And I have two versions of her. I have that one, and I have this one with the horns. Woohoo! And if you ever read Joseph Miker Lissinger, you can find out a lot about Dawn as a goddess. She's completely made up. She's not actually an ancient character, but she's typifying Hecate Iora, meaning dawn, like the morning goddess. She's typifying the triple goddess and a few other stuff. That's why she has the 3 tiers. And it's womanhood, or maidenhood, womanhood, and then old age, I believe, which then translates later into birth, life, and death. And I'm guessing by your understanding, you're taking in a lot of Shakespearean understanding, which is not related to the actual history of Hecate. Hecate is the goddess of the crossroads, but you're misunderstanding a lot if you think that has anything to do with the Trinity. And you're also misunderstanding a lot if you think she's the first tri-goddess or triple goddess. Even Zeus himself, his internal thought is the child Athena. Athena is born of a male god. It's only later theology that gives Athena a female goddess mother. Yeah, they were in Macbeth. They were in Macbeth. Yes, you're completely correct, Mark. Again, you're firing on all cylinders today, buddy.
Okay, are the dots connecting for you?
I'm unaware of any data from the ancient world that support this. We can track the development of the Trinitarian formulas.
Hold on, I'm going to show this to you. You see that right there? I recommend you read all of this. So we have Edith Hamilton, we have Hesiod, we have Homer, we have the Homeric hymn, we have Quintus, Thucydides, Arian, Herodotus. I hope you guys can hear me. Sicelus Diodorus, or Diodorus Sicelus. We have Livy, Rufus, Xenophon, Plutarch. Plutarch is really good for this. We have Sappho, if you really want to get into some fun stuff here. And then this is later ancient Rome stuff. So yeah, your understanding is just completely wrong, completely made up, completely fictional, based probably just like how people who talk about hell are basing all their stuff on fantasy. Oh yeah, I know. I'm such an a-hole. I buy all my books in physical form. It's so much more expensive too. But yeah, I buy most of my books in physical form, and then I usually get like one audiobook a month from Audible. So, that's how I do my thing.
Pretty closely, and it's mostly an organic internal development within Christianity. It's operating under the influence of Greek philosophical traditions, but none of which are related to the idea of maiden mother crone, to my knowledge. And those titles and identities are being borrowed from much earlier Jewish literature. So again, I'm unaware of any data that support this claim, but if anybody out there knows of any primary texts from antiquity that demonstrate this as an appropriation, all right, let's see it.
Christianity stole everything, turned around, and killed its own mother.
So this is actually from... Oh, I'm just going to drop a whole bunch of stuff. Okay. So where she's getting the idea of stealing back the Witch's Magical Handbook, bam, and you have the Witch's Bible. There's a few other ones, but I think I threw them away, to be honest with you. I think these were the only 2 that I thought were like worth keeping just as references. But these are later neo-pagans and Wiccans trying to steal back ideas from a previous period, and they're trying to justify it. And so they justify it by saying, well, the Christians are stealing our ideas. But there's no proof. That's the problem. And the only time that there is proof is when Christians themselves say, hey, we like this pagan thing. We're going to try to Christify it. But whenever they do it, they admit to it. So there's not really a controversy here unless you're coming from a form of Protestantism that denies all that history.
Because there is a lot that Christianity takes from paganism. Okay, and you all continuously demonize it.
Certainly throughout the history of Christian colonialism and imperialism, there has been appropriation, there has been syncretism, particularly as groups have converted somewhere along the spectrum from entirely voluntarily to entirely forced. Christianity is practiced in a variety of different ways around the world and throughout time. So far in this video, I've seen very little that identifies anything that can be supported by actual data, however.
Christmas? Jesus was a May baby, May or June, okay?
We don't know that.
The summer, spring baby, all right? The only reason you celebrate Christmas in December is because that's when the winter solstice is.
Okay, so Dan's going to do a better explanation, but I want to give mine first, which is the way that they did it is they thought that babies were in the womb, I think it's for 9 months. The ancient world didn't have the right chronology on how many months it was for the baby. They're either 1 month early, so it would have been 8, or they're 1 month late, which would be 10. Doesn't matter for the sake of this conversation. So they then count back that many dates from the death of the person, because people didn't really track births in that way, documentary-wise. So someone became famous, they want to know when they were born, they would calculate from their death, because there was an ancient belief, supposedly, and I've heard this stated in a bunch of books. I have not heard it stated in any of my ancient books. I'm going to be very clear. So I want a source on this if anybody knows it. But according to scholarly tradition, gotcha guys. Now you guys are stuck with tradition too. Apparently, people would take 9 months before their death because people believe that you died on the same day that you were born. Again, I've read this in a lot of scholarly books. I have never seen a source in any of my ancient translations of anything that state this. But whatever.
That's when pagans celebrate what we call Yule. Okay, your Christmas tree, it's a Yule tree.
No. First off, there was no communication between the ancient Judeans and the Vikings. Not just because chronologically that can't happen, but in general, it wasn't happening. So no, Yule is a different pagan holiday from a different culture that never interacted with Judaism at all in any kind of way. So let's not worry about the Britons, because the Britons don't get interacted with until Julius Caesar goes and fucks with them. So Runic? Celtic? Druidic, there we go. I lost the word. Druidic tradition has nothing to do with Judaism. No, so if you actually read an ancient book, I'm going to call it ancient, it's actually medieval. If you read a book called The Lives of the Saints, I have a modern version of it. It tells the history of this. Basically, Christmas was actually celebrated on a completely different day. Judaism influenced outside cultures, paganism. So the pagan cultures that would have influenced Jewish holidays and therefore influenced Christian holidays, because Christian holidays are just reformulations of the Jewish holidays, are the Canaanite cultures, the Babylonian cultures, Assyrian cultures, Sumerian cultures, a lot of Egyptian culture, some Hellenistic influence, but Hellenism doesn't happen until way late in the development of when Judaism comes out, because you're talking about that being spread through Alexander the Great and that originating with a, classical Hellenism. So really Judaism is not being influenced by Hellenism because Greece doesn't come to prominence at that time. If you want to say that ancient Mycenae is pre-Greek, fine, but you're going to get to a lot of issues with Dorianism and a lot of different problems with what ancient Greek culture was before it had its renewal after the Greek Dark Ages. So you really can't give the Greeks credit for influencing Judaism in that way. Yes, there is some integration if you're going to talk about the Sea People and the fact that there are Jewish groups listed on these Sea People list, but some of that could just be fear-mongering. We don't know. We don't have hard evidence of that. So I would argue instead that Judaism might have developed its holidays out of real events, and some of these real events might have coexisted with other quote-unquote pagan cultures around its time, like Canaanite traditions, Babylonian traditions, and they might have pulled that into their Judaism. It's possible. But Britain wasn't influencing ancient Judaism. Norwegians weren't influencing. None of that. It can't happen. The cultural exchange hadn't happened historically for that influence to be there. The holiday predates the people that created the holiday you're saying they're stealing from. That's one of the problems when people try to make Sol Invictus the influence for Christ. Sol Invictus happens later, so it can't happen before. If it doesn't exist before, there's no before to be stolen from. So it's a bad argument. Chronologically, it doesn't work.
That's a Yule log. The only reason you celebrate it in December on the winter solstice is because Christianity during the Crusades wanted to convert all the pagans.
No, they're definitely not. Jeremiah is not influencing a Christmas tree in any kind of way, Mark. There is no such thing as a Christmas tree in Judaism. That makes no sense whatsoever. Christmas trees get developed way later toward the modern period, toward like modern time. So just to be really blunt, whether you're talking about the cedars of Lebanon or you're talking about the palm trees that existed in ancient Israel, the type of vegetation that existed in this area does not match the type of vegetation that we can see and cultivate here now from Northern Europe. There was no cross-pollination happening in that way. There was no trade routes for the food and plants from that area to enter into Israel. Even now, the Mediterranean still has plenty of European wildlife and plants and not so much American, even though American cross-pollination and cultivation happened during the conquest period and during the exploration period or imperial period, if you want.
And they said, hey, look.
Oh, I'm using a bunch of big words today.
celebrate these things at the same time. Isn't that so convenient? Come celebrate our holiday instead.
None of this is accurate. While Jesus obviously wasn't born on December 25th, we don't really have a good idea when he would have been born.
And again, Christmas used to be celebrated on a completely different day. It was a specific saint who decided to change the holiday. And they did. And it did have to do, I'm not sure if it was this holiday or if it was Purim, because Purim's Halloween. If it was Purim or if it was Christmas that fell really close to a pagan holiday, I think it was Halloween. And so they wanted to do it one day off. So that way the pre-holiday and the post-holiday would counteract the influence of the pagans. But it was already a Jewish holiday and it was already a Christian celebration. They just moved it to a different date to counteract the paganism. But yeah, again, I think that's Halloween. And it has nothing to do with Samhain either, because Samhain, again, is a European holiday that there were no Europeans. The Britons that we think of as Britons, the ancient Celts, were wiped out by the Anglo-Saxons, by the Anglos and the Saxons. They killed them all. The ancient Britons don't exist anymore. You know, you're coloring history with anachronistic terminology. But if you actually read history and see what happened to the people whose culture you think was being stolen, they never interacted with the culture you think they're influencing. And by the time that the two cultures met, the culture that you want to say existed was already wiped out.
The traditions about his birth are in any way historical. But the identification of December 25th as Jesus' birthday goes back to the beginning of the 3rd century CE, and a calculation of his birth based on the notion that he died on March 25th. And anciently, they associated the date of a famous or influential person's death with the date of their birth. But for Jesus, they associated the date of his death with the date of his conception. And then based on traditional measurements of gestation, they counted 9 months later.
Again, I've heard this in a lot of sources, and I've heard different versions of this from a lot of sources. I haven't seen any actual ancient texts that makes this claim about this calculation. I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm talking about how you calculate when a person was born or died. I've seen a lot of ancient commentary that says this is how the calculation was made. But this is medieval, post-medieval, up till today, up to modern commentary, stating that this is how the calculation was made. I haven't seen anything in the text that says this is how the calculation was made. So, I don't know.
And came up with
I feel like there might be some kind of reference in Herodotus, possibly Livy, but I don't know.
25th. So we have Hippolytus to thank for that, around 210 CE or something like that. And Christmas trees have nothing to do with Yule. They go back to the 15th and the 16th centuries in and around the Upper Rhine region, and my video number, McClellan 2279, goes into a bit more detail about that.
Halloween. That's Samhain.
It's really not. Samhain has nothing to do with real Halloween. So All Hallows Eve is a Catholic holiday, and then another holiday, All Souls Day. So All Souls is for everyone who's died. All Saints Day is for everyone who we think's in heaven, or at least we hope's in heaven. And then All Souls is covering anyone we might have missed. It's been paganized and it's been bastardized a little bit in Latin America, and it's gotten kind of gross if you look at it from a puritanical viewpoint. But it's the Catholic. You don't really get offended by that. I would say word development or custom. You don't really get offended by it. But that's where things like the Mata and all that kind of weird non-Catholic, non-canonical saints come from. These kind of growth in traditions. But that's all post-1920 development. You're talking about post, 18-something, the French war in the United States. The French war in Mexico. That's a long time after Jesus Christ, and that's definitely a long time after Judaism establishes these holidays. So you have Purim, you have other stuff like that. Now you did have a pagan holiday near the 31st that had to do with, I want to say it's the spring equinox. So the equinoxes, this is something that Wiccanism gets correct. The equinoxes and the vernixes, the vanixes, whatever. These are actually super important because they're how you tell when you're going to have to do grain, how you're going to have to do agriculture. So that actually is real. You don't have watches. You have to figure out time in a different way. So you would have these harvests and you'd have these festivals, and you can't have the food rot because there's no way to store food for super long periods of time. So you have to eat all the food and get really fat and hold yourself in. This is why fat is sexy at these time periods, because it means that you can survive for long periods without food. So you're having these feasts as a way not just to celebrate the god or goddess, and you got to get rid of all the junk stuff. So you burn all the junk stuff, all the bad food, all the stuff no one wants to eat. You send that up to the gods as smoke, so the gods can eat. All the good stuff you should give out to the people, not just the priests. So the best stuff goes to the priest and the king, and then the people get everything else. And the women and children, good luck to you. Good luck to you. I hope someone in your household bringing some food from the feast, because otherwise you're just starving. But the men get to eat well, citizens especially. So yeah, no, there's a lot going on. It's very tricky, and she has a very limited understanding. And by the way, I'm saying these things, but different cultures have slightly different traditions. What's going on in Athens and what's going on in Sparta is different. What's going on in Hetia and what's going on in Babylon, different. What's going on in Egypt, and even within these countries, what's going on in Upper Egypt and what's going on in Lower Egypt, very different. So don't think that all these cultures are the same just because now we have like this monocultural idea. Each city-state had its own way of doing things, and its gods and goddesses regulated a lot of that.
That's Samhain. It's actually a very sacred holiday.
So I think the argument is pretty strong that Samhain has influenced the celebration of Halloween, but I think it's most likely a syncretistic combination of Samhain with the first of the 3 feast days of All Hallowtide, which is an earlier Christian celebration of dead saints.
Easter, it's Esther's Day.
There's no such thing. Easter is 100% a Christian adaptation of the Jewish Passover.
Your birthday candles. The Christian church banned.
What is the Christian church to her? I'm kind of curious what denomination she's talking about when she says this. This is ridiculous.
Birthday candles for many, many years, and you were not allowed.
I want to see not to steal Dan's line, but I want to see documentation on this. I want to see where the church banned birthday candles. I've never heard this. This is something that's new. So if this is real, it's funny, but I don't think it's true.
To participate in the blowing out of a candle because it is a pagan practice. To light a candle, for Christians to light a candle at prayer, that's a pagan thing.
So I'm unaware of any prohibition on the blowing out of candles within the history of Christianity. The use of candles goes all the way back to the earliest generations of Christians. And the use of candles, their lighting, their extinguishing, their carrying, has all kinds of different symbolism from all kinds of different societies around the world. The use of candles and birthday cakes probably descends from the Kinderfest from Germany from centuries ago.
I have no idea. I've never looked into this, so I don't know. It's possible. Dan could be right here about the origin of birthday candles. I don't know.
Be some pagan influence somewhere along the way. The notion that this is a known appropriation directly from paganism strikes me as not.
This is an 8-minute video, and we've done an hour of commentary.
Supported by any data. But as usual, if anybody has any data to demonstrate this is incorrect, by all means, let's see it.
The herbs you burn, the oils you use, the sermons you say.
So Dan's going to concentrate on the sermon stuff. Let's back up. So incense and burning of stuff is pagan. That is correct. But it's not just pagan. It's universal. It's part of most people's religious practices. But yes, pagans used to burn incense and burn good smelling things to give up to the gods because they believe the smoke, because they're trying to mimic what the priests are doing. So the priests are burning food to make the food go up to the gods. So regular people wanted to pray to the gods too, so they would burn good smelling scents and stuff like that to send it up. Not only because of that, but also because people stunk back in the day, so they wanted to cover that up too. But yeah, that's what it's there for. That's not completely wrong. There are special herbs and stuff like that are supposed to be pleasing to gods and goddesses. And then Judaism, as it developed, kept that hobby, and so did Christians. Yes, exactly, Mark. Moses and Aaron were burning incense in the Old Testament. Yeah. So this is like one things that she gets right in this entire video. Is probably the only thing she gets right in this entire video, is that incense and statues are pagan concepts, and Christians kept we threw away the idols, we kept the incense. We did. But ritual magic versus prayer is very different. And what's happening in most religion with prayer has nothing to do with magic. And most religions hate magic. Even ancient pagan cultures, like I said, hunted witches and didn't like witches. Magic's very different than a prayer.
Those are spells.
I think she might be getting confused with the word incantation. I think what might be happening here. I'm not really sure.
You're telling me that you all sit in a room together, joined, body, mind, and spirit, chanting and you don't see this
I don't know any Christianity that does chanting in this way. I'm thinking maybe singing of the Psalms or singing hymns is what she means by chanting.
all work.
But that's not what chanting is. Chanting is very different than that.
That's not a meaningful description of any sermon I've ever heard.
Person to open their mouths without doing their research and have an opinion on shit they know nothing about, I'm gonna hex you.
Irony is a funny word. Irony.
I think social media discourse would be a lot more productive and a lot healthier if a lot of people got a lot better informed about what does and does not constitute adequate research.
All right, that's it for tonight, guys. Cheers. Peace.